Well, hello. I'm going to speak today about the characteristics of vowels and consonants in the vocal tract. So in the previous section, we spoke about the anatomic overview, the vocal tract, and we looked at the muscles and the structures of the vocal tract. So now we are going to speak about the articulatory characteristics and resonant characteristics of the vocal tract. You should pause this tape in the middle so that you can take notes and take a break and then come back. So as we explained before, the vocal tract acts as a resonator. And it doesn't make its own tone. Instead, it takes the vocal fold buzz as it goes through it, and it modifies it, it echoes it, it amplifies, that buzz in different ways, and it filters opposing forces. So the sounds the frequencies that remain in the vocal tract are those that enhance the wave, and when you add them up all together, they produce resonance, they produce a clear, loud sound. So these are the basic characteristics of the vocal tract that make it act as a filter, as a resonator that is able to amplify the buzz from the vocal folds. Number one, the vocal tract is a quarter wave resonator, and we understand this as meaning that the first resonant frequency that occurs, it has a wave, it occurs when the sound wave reaches 4 times the length of the vocal tract itself. In other words, 1/4 of the wave fits at the first time. With the resonant frequency occurs the first time when 1/4 of the wave fills the entire vocal tract. So the filtering mechanism of the vocal tract works so that the first resonant frequency occurs, then the second one that we expect to occur is deleted. Is attenuated. And then the third one is kept. And then the fifth is, the fourth is deleted. So you get selectively the even numbers, even frequencies are attenuated and the odd frequencies are kept. And when you add these odd frequencies that we call formants, then you have a louder sound. This is just a refresher. We discussed this extensively in the first part of the course. So the other thing is, every tube, we have the pharynx, that vertical tube is a resonator by itself. Is a closed tube resonator. Now we couple it with the nasal cavity. That cavity is a resonator by itself. And then the oral cavity is another resonator. When you combine these three together, you create a bigger, a resonator that's a wide band resonator. It's a broad band resonator. It accepts a wide range of sounds that it can amplify. So it makes it produce approximately 40 different formants. But of course, the first 3 are the most critical. They are the loudest and the most critical frequencies that distinguish the sounds that we hear. So the resonant frequency is a broadly tuned resonator because of the irregular configuration and because it has 3 different tubes combined together that enables it to expand the variety of sounds that it can amplify and respond to. The vocal tract, that's the third characteristic, the vocal tract is modifiable, and constantly as we talk, it is being modified from front to back, from, the diameter is modified, the length is modified, and in different ways it is constantly being modified, and every sound has its own characteristics that are produced by specific modifications for that vocal tract. These qualities of the vocal tracts, especially the ability to modify it to produce individual distinct sounds, enables us to produce a wide variety of sounds. So you can see from right above the vocal folds, and you go up to the back of the nasal cavity, that is the pharynx that we discussed, laryngopharynx or hypopharynx, oropharynx, nasopharynx. That is a vertical tube by itself. It has its own resonant characteristics. But when you combine it, you couple it with the nasal cavity here, you now have quite a significant diversity and resonance. And then you couple this with the oral cavity, then you have quite a broadly tuned resonator. So there are three basic factors that determine vocal tract resonance. Number one, the length of the vocal tract. For example, one of the reasons why the adult male voice is low pitch, that is because of the length of the vocal tract. The adult male has the longest vocal tract from the vocal folds to the lips, and that is about 17 to 18 centimeters. For the adult female, one of the contributors to higher frequency is that the vocal tract is shorter. So you have 14 to 15 centimeters, 14 to 15 centimeter vocal tract for adult females. For a very young child, the vocal tract goes from 6 to 8 centimeters. So all of these tell us that the shorter the vocal tract is, the higher the frequency, because go back to the beginning, the first few classes, we discussed the relationship between volume and frequency in general, and length and frequency. So now, how does the vocal tract length influence frequency? Simply, as I mentioned, the longer the vocal tract is, the lower the frequency, the resonant frequency, and vice versa. So there's an inverse relationship between vocal tract length and resonant frequency. The vocal tract formants are calculated based on the schwa sound, the position of the schwa. As you know, the schwa is the sound that is closest to the neutral position. Like if you are sitting there and not saying anything, that is, your vocal tract is shaped in a certain way at rest. The sound, the smallest sound that shows the smallest modifications of the vocal tract is the schwa. So for this reason, in order to measure the resonant frequency of the human voice, we need a sound to come from the vocal folds. And to make that, to make a sound that comes from below and make it go through the vocal tract, then you measure and take the, calculate, the first resonant frequency, or calculate F1. So that is the sound that shows vocal tract resonance, and the quality, how long the vocal tract is, how wide it is, and so on, what kind of constrictions we have, and so on. So that is why the schwa is used, and typically the adult male vocal tract is used in most studies as the model for the calculations, and the schwa is used as the basic sound. in order to understand the functions and characteristics of the vocal tract and how it works with the buzz that comes from the vocal folds, we need to understand the theory called source filter theory. This theory tells us exactly, it explains how sound that we hear is the product of the vocal or the fundamental frequency of the vocal fold and the filtering mechanism that that's in the vocal tract. So in this case, source is the vocal fold fundamental frequency, is the source, the original sound that is produced. And we understand when you look at the vocal folds as they physically vibrate, you have the harmonic frequencies come at even, like smoothly with no deletions. So you have, say, if a vocal fold vibrates at 100 hertz, then the resonant frequency of that vocal fold, not the resonant frequency, the harmonics of the vocal fold vibration, then they would start at 200 and 3. They come also show at 3 and 400 and 500. See, nothing is skipped. It is just like a guitar string, but you are speaking about something physical that is going back and forth. So that buzz, as it goes through the vocal tract, now it gets modified, where the even numbers, even frequency harmonics are deleted, like 200 is deleted. And then you leave 3, and then you take 400 out, you take 600 out. So selectively, you attenuate the even numbers and leave the odd ones. And the outcome of the, of this process is filtering. So, again, the filter is the vocal tract, as it acts as a resonator that deletes or that attenuates the even harmonics of the vocal fold buzz. And the source is the vocal fold fundamental frequency. It is the source sound, because if you don't have that source sound, that original sound from the vocal folds, then nothing is going to happen after that in the vocal tract. So the vocal tract, it basically takes whatever you put through it and it modifies it into, in a certain way. So based on the source filter theory, speech is the outcome of, you hear it at the lips, of course, is the outcome of the combination of the source tone, the fundamental vocal pitch tone, and the resonant frequencies of the vocal tract. All of them are combined together, and then at the outcome is what you hear, that is speech. So the vocal tract itself is independent from the vocal pitch. From the vocal, from the source. So the source is the vocal folds, for example. And the vocal tract by itself is a different mechanism. So even though they work together, each one functions independently. How do we prove that? Okay, let's see. You want to see that the vocal tract can function independently from the vocal folds. So we make a sound and we keep the same pitch level of the vocal folds. And we keep the vocal fold production steady at the same level, but we are going to change the characteristics of the vocal tract. And we will see if we can do that. So you make a vowel like E. Okay, so I'm holding the source steady. E, and then as I'm holding it steady, the same buzz, I'm going to change the vocal tract mechanism, and it is going to create a whole different thing. So, so as you see now, the same buzz that is coming out of the vocal folds is being shaped as it goes through by the vocal tract into a different sound. So the vocal tract can function independent of the source. Now, how do we prove that the source functions independent of the vocal tract? In that case, you make a sound and then you change your pitch here. So I'm saying ooh, holding the vocal tract steady, no change, but I'm going to change the vibration characteristics of the source. So ooh, or I'm sorry. We are supposed to hold the filter steady and just change the pitch of the vocal tract. So you make a sound, the vowel, and change the pitch. So as in So now we have proven, we have demonstrated how the source can function independently. And again, by making a vowel and changing its pitch in the vocal folds, by the vocal folds, and holding the filter steady. The other way to prove that the filter can function independently from the source is by modifying the filter while you are making a sound. So you basically make two sounds. So by changing the vocal tract configuration. So again, if you say E and simply round your lips and protrude them forward while there's no change in the buzz and the frequency. So E, U, E, U. Okay. Don't worry about these calculations and symbols, but this is what shows us, explains to us. This is how the vocal folds, how the tone, the buzz that they make, how it produces harmonic frequencies. And we said if they say a vocal fold has 100 hertz, for example, you are going to, the harmonics are going to be starting 200 and then 300, 400, 500, systematically, nothing is skipped. And you go all the way down until the frequency becomes so high that it doesn't become audible anymore and the energy is gone and the sound stops. And when you put that tone through the vocal tract, as you could see here, it is going to selectively attenuate the frequencies that are even in number gradually. And then you come to a point where you have, for example, 500 tone here amplified, 1500 amplified, and then 1500, 250, 200, 2500. Then, so you keep kind of, keep the odd numbers and amplify, and attenuate the even numbers here. So that is the filtering mechanism. And the source that comes out, the sound that comes out of the lips is actually, you combine this sound with all the other sounds produced in the vocal tract together, and this is what you hear. So all of the speech at the lips is a combination of the fundamental frequency of the vocal folds and the harmonic frequencies of the vocal folds, combining them with the resonant frequencies of the vocal tract. So let's look at vowel formant values or frequencies. Vowel formant values depend on the length of the vocal tract, the degree of constriction of the vocal tract, and the location. Where is that constriction is in the vocal tract. So three characteristics, or three factors determine the resonant values of the vowels. So for example, F1 is related to vocal tract volume. How big, how much air do you have? How much space do you have? And the degree of constriction. So examples that are kind of opposites include E and Ah. For E, well, you can refer to the text, and also we discussed this before. You'll find it in the previous set of slides, actually in the first unit. So for E, first let's remind you of the phonetic description of E. It's high front, and then unrounded and tense. So what we've looked at here is high and front. It means the tongue is high in the oral cavity and front, to the farthest position in the front. The tongue is a flexible organ. If it moves out of an area, it leaves it empty. It creates more room and when it leaves. And it makes a constriction in the area that it is going to go to. So when we say high front, it is near, close in the area of the alveolar ridge where F2 is going to show. F1 is in the hypopharynx, is going to show in the hypopharynx, above the vocal folds and in the area that is the lower pharynx. So when you say E, the tongue moves forward and moves up, and it creates space in the lower pharynx, and that is going to mean F1 is going to decrease. Now, what about F2? Now, the tongue is occupying the area where F2 is, and that is going to create a higher frequency for F2, for E. Let's take the Ah. When I say Ah, the muscle, the hyoglossus, is going to pull the tongue back and down, and it is going to make it constrict the hypopharynx. There will be less space. That makes F1 for Ah higher. Now, what about F1 for F2 for Ah? And then the tongue is out of the front. Now that makes it significantly low for Ah. So we know now how the tongue position contributes to modifying the vocal tract, to making F1 and F2 and the different formants different from each other for particular sounds. There is an inverse relationship between F1 and the tongue and tongue height, as I just explained using E and Ah. So generally, high vowels have a low F1, and low vowels have a high F1. So, what does that mean? How many high vowels do we have? Okay, kind of think about the vowel quadrilateral. You are going to have two high front vowels, two high back vowels. And let's go back here. Okay, we'll show the quadrilateral later. I don't want to be looking back and forth. But we have E and I, as in see and sit, up front, high front. And then back we have U and O, as in pull and pull. So four high vowels. Two of them are front, high front, and two of them are high back. Okay. So all of these vowels are going to have a low F1. Low vowels. How many are there? There are two. Look at the quadrilateral and find A as in cat and Ah as in car or father. So these two are going to have high F1 because the tongue is retracted and there's less room in the hypopharynx. So again, just keep thinking about volume, about length, about constriction, where that constriction is. You will be able to figure out what kind of formant you are going to have, formant value that you will have. F2 now is related to the length of, pay attention to this, the oral cavity. I'm not saying the vocal tract. The vocal tract is everything. I'm saying the oral cavity. The oral cavity, it is where the back of the tongue and the facial pillars are, right there, and to the lips. So when you think about F2, it is near the alveolar ridge, across from the alveolar ridge. There's a constriction there, because, you know, many of the sounds that we make. And in the space in front of that constriction, if it is smaller, we're going to have a higher pitch. If it is bigger, we're going to have a lower pitch. So the lips are going to contribute to making the vocal tract higher or lower. For example, if I say any rounded sound, I'm going to round your lips, my lips, and protrude them. Ooh, and that could significantly elongate the vocal tract. So again, F2 is related to the length of the oral cavity, specifically the space in front of the tongue constriction. So when you say E, that's the constriction here is across from the alveolar ridge, and then to the lips. So that makes, for example, F2, now it is higher because there is less room. But if you say, for example, if you say, ooh, ooh, now the constriction here is much bigger. There's much space because the tongue is moved back and up. So as a result, you create a huge space. And again, the lips protrude forward. Now that tube is from the constriction to the lips is tremendous. And that gives F2, makes F2 different for U. So F2 is related to tongue advancement. Where is the tongue in the oral cavity? Is it back? Is it in the center? Is it forward, front? So back vowels for F2, for back vowels. The back vowels are U and O and O and A. So these back vowels have longer distance between the oral constriction and the lips. So as a result, you create a bigger tube and in the oral cavity, So, for all these back vowels. So back vowels have a low F2 and the front vowels have a high F2. It's again a matter of space, a matter of configuration of the volume. Now we move on to spectrographic analysis. A spectrograph uses a spectrogram, and the spectrogram gives you different kinds of information that's quite important. So spectrography is an instrumental analysis of sound that identifies, number one, frequency of the sound, amplitude or loudness of the sound, and duration, how long in real time does the sound last. The information again is displayed on the spectrogram and it shows changes in production while you are making the sound. So here's a spectrogram showing the production for E and U and A. The bands, the dark bands that you see here are what is called formant. And these formants characterize, again, primarily vowel sounds, and also to some extent resonant sounds. So for the E, for example, when you look at the width, first let's look at the vertical bar. It starts from 0 to 1,000, 2,000, all the way up to 8,000. That's the range. Basically, speech goes up to 7,000, 8,000. So the dark bands you have are called these the formants, and they show where the energy is. If you break a formant down, you just magnify it, you'll find it is the compressions or rarefactions of the individual waves. So from the lowest level, you have the loudest sound. You have the first formant, which has the greatest amount of energy. And these formants speak at different times, of course, for different vowels. And for E, F1, you can see from 0 to 1,000, F1 is about 300 hertz. It's going to show you. That is the first time that the vocal tract is going to buzz to create a resonant frequency when the sound goes through it. When it reaches 300 hertz, it's going to start to give you that first resonant frequency. Then the second formant is going to show when the frequency reaches approximately 2,200 or 2,300 hertz. And then you go to the fourth and the fifth as you go up. So for the, you can see now, this is what we mean by saying F1 for E, that shows the hypopharynx. And the tongue is out of the area and the space is larger and it gives you that characteristic. Now, how about U? The tongue is way high, but it's also back. However, because you have a huge tube created for U and extending your lips out and making the tongue go higher, that makes the tube much bigger, and that makes the resonant frequency F1 for U significantly low. It is a little bit lower than F1. So, for F1 for E. And then immediately after you have F2 showing up, here. And, then you have, the F3 but the most important ones are F2, F1, 2, and 3. So let's look at the Ah. We said F1 for Ah is higher because there's a constriction. There's not much space in the back now. So F1 is going to show up at almost like 900 hertz here. And then F2 is going to show right after. So every sound, again, looking at this spectrogram, the information that we have, number one, frequency is shown on the, is displayed on the vertical axis. And time is displayed on the horizontal axis, the actual time it takes. So from this the beginning of this band here to the very end, that is how many seconds it took to make this sound. And if you find the gap, that shows how much silence did you have in between this sound and that sound. So again, the spectrogram shows you the formants for each one, with the lowest formant is on the bottom, and then as you go up, it shows the higher formants. And the darker the band is, the louder, the greater the intensity, or the louder the sound is. In speech science, there are two kinds of spectrograms that are used. One is called narrowband and one is called wideband. And we know from the names that our narrowband is very specific. It doesn't allow it doesn't respond to many sounds that are transmitted through it. And it is used for specific purposes. So narrowband spectrograms, they display harmonic frequencies of the glottal sound. What is the glottal sound? Is the sound that is produced by the vocal folds. So that is narrow band spectrograms display the values of the vocal fold harmonics, which is 200, 300, 400, and so on. It shows a fundamental frequency of the vocal fold in addition to the individual harmonics. It uses a filter that has a bandwidth of 45 to approximately 45 to 50 hertz. So you would have, say, one frequency, let's say that is 500. And then before it, you could have 25 less, and on the other side, 25 more. So it will be 475 on the left and 525 on the right. That is the average. That is the bandwidth that we are using here, between 45 and 50 hertz. And you want that to be specific because you want to make distinctions between, individual sounds on a very, very high level. So narrowband spectrograms respond to or show each harmonic separately because you want to distinguish one from the other. So you cannot just accept any sound coming in there. Wideband is going to focus on the vocal tract itself, what is happening in the vocal tract. And it shows vowel formants as they are in the vocal tract. And it uses a filter that has a wider bandwidth, a greater bandwidth of 300 to 500. So if you have a resonant frequency of, let's say, 500, then you take 500, it can amplify 250 lower cutoff, and it goes up to 750, the upper cutoff. So between 250 and 750, that's quite a wide band where it can amplify and sounds. So it detects and adds up multiple harmonics that show up as formants in the vocal tract. So know these differences. Let's look at the acoustic properties of vowels. And we'll take kind of in this few slides, we're going to speak more of the traditional characteristics of vowels as they are described in phonetics classes. So that is quite a quick crash course in vowel and consonant description. There are 4 characteristics that we use to describe a vowel. The goal is to create a description that applies uniquely to each individual vowel. So when you hear a description, you know for sure that only this particular vowel is going to accept it, or it can only apply to this particular vowel. So you can think about, let's say, a group of people in a class, and you have each one has a unique name. But there are some people who have the same name. You have Sarah, maybe in a class who might have 4 Sarahs. And then when you say Sarah, that is a non-specific name in that situation because there are other people with that name. Now you need to add a last name. Well, maybe another person, one of the Sarahs has the same last name. Okay, then you need to add a middle name. So you keep adding distinguishing characteristics until you reach a level where when you say Sarah so-and-so, no one else is going to raise her hand except for that one. So each vowel is unique, and using the 4 characteristics to describe each individual vowel is going to make them very distinctive from each other. So first 2 characteristics that we have to describe vowels have to do with the tongue. So is the tongue low in the oral cavity? Is it in the mid, or is it high? So tongue height. And then advancement. Is the tongue in the back of the oral cavity? Is it in the center of the oral cavity? Is it in the front of the oral cavity? So back, center, front. And we look at then the muscular tension that is used when we make the sound. Is the sound tense or is it lax? You can identify the value of the tension, muscular tension, by the length of the sound. If a sound is longer, then you know it is tense. If it is shorter, then you know it is lax, because it doesn't require as much muscular energy. So for the sound as oo, say pull versus pull, the first sound is longer. It means your muscles stayed working on it for a longer time. Pull, it is shorter relatively, and that means that the muscles worked for less time. That makes it tense, lax. So to describe a sound like, for example, E, that sound is high and front. High front, and then tense, and then unrounded. So these are the four characteristics. You do not need to give any other things. You don't need to say, oh, the tongue goes left, right. No, you just describe a sound using these words as I am using them now. Let's look at the E. So the E is also high and then front. High front. And then lax. It is relatively shorter than the E. Lax and unrounded. So they agree on everything except for one is tense, one is lax. So there are two high front vowels. Let's look at the back vowels. They are also high back vowels. And they include the oo and o. So oo is high, back, tense, rounded vowel. And then the o is exactly the same, except that the o is lax. So these are the high vowels. Two front, high front, and two high back. Let's look at the mid vowels. We have two mid front and we have two back vowels. So the mid is A, as in saying Sunday, Monday, Friday. And I'm using this for a purpose that you will learn in phonetics. This is a tense vowel. So tense, mid front, tense, and unrounded vowel. The a, as in head, or instead, or bed, that is the epsilon, is also mid front, lax, unrounded. Okay, let's look at the mid back. O, as in Melrose. That O is high back, rounded O, and so high back rounded, and it is tense. O, not many people use it in the American English, so O, as in law, or thought, fought. People say fought, law. So, but this sound here is mid-back, and muscular tension, it is tense, and all rounded. So as you look now, they have the same description now. We have to make to say something to make them distinguished from each other. We simply add to this category here. Both of them are in this category. But we say, where in this category? You notice O is placed above. The tongue is higher for O. And O, the tongue is lower. So we just say, mid, and then hyphen back. Mid, high back. Okay. Mid, high back. And then tense, rounded. And then this one you say mid, low back. Again, these are hyphenated because they mean a great difference. Mid, low back, and tension is tense and rounded. For the low vowels, you have two. With the middle one, we don't use usually in American English as a sound, but it occurs in different combinations. But don't worry about the middle one. So, a, as in cat, is a low front, lax, unrounded. A is low back, tense, unrounded. So you notice now that all the front sounds are unrounded. All the back sounds except one are rounded. Now we have the four central sounds. So mid, the tongue is in the middle, and in terms of height, and in terms of advancement, the tongue is in the center of the mouth. So now, this sound is the schwa, as in about, alone, above, astounded. So this sound, the schwa, is a mid-central, lax, unrounded. The closest one to it is the as in mud, mud, bug. So if you just add a little bit of muscular energy to the schwa, you make the but they are very, very similar. So the you describe it again, it has exactly the same characteristics as the schwa. So you say it's a mid-central, lax, unrounded. How do we distinguish it now from the So the schwa. So we say the schwa is a mid, and then high central, high hyphen central, and then lax unrounded. For the we say mid, low dash, a low hyphen central. So that means, and in some research you will find it squarely placed as a low vowel, but you know, most studies put it there, and we consistently follow, you know, just one kind of, style, so we wouldn't be confusing you. So we put it in this area here. So then we have these two symbols, these two sounds. The as in the final ER of words like planter, carpenter, butter. So all the AR as an example is the as a sound. It is a vowel, even though it is an so R sound is treated as a vowel. And it's called the unstressed schwa. So the has, it's a mid-central and then lax, rounded vowel. The as in bird or stir, this is a mid-central, tense, rounded. So it is only different from the in terms of tension, muscular tension. So now we have discussed quickly all the vowel characteristics, and you know how to describe each one of them. Again, this is a crash course in vowel description. Each one is gonna use only 4 characteristics. To make it easier also, here are the tense vowels listed and the lax vowels. So the tense ones, the E and then A, U, O, and A. And then the lax ones are here. So the tense vowels, how different are they from the lax ones? They involve more extreme articulation positions. They have a longer duration because that means that the muscles are working for a longer time. They occur in open syllables. What is an open syllable? It is a syllable that doesn't have a consonant at the end. Like when you say clue, ooh, clue. There's no consonant at the end of this syllable. Clue. So ooh can be used here, but you can't use o in English. You can't say clo in one word. It doesn't, there's no word like that. When you say, for example, in the case of, o, it would be, you can say flow, for example, it can come at the end. But these sounds, the lax vowels, typically, they do not come at the end, except for, there are some exceptions, of course, that you don't have to worry about in this class, for the schwa and for the e. You don't have to worry about this. But generally, like, these, lax vowels, mostly, they occur in closed syllables, and there are some exceptions. Like when you say, for example, clip, for example, clip, but you wouldn't find the word that says clip, for example. But you will find the E in certain words at the very end, and again, in phonetics you can study them. Diphthongs are sounds in English. There are sounds that are a combination of two vowels. The first vowel is called the on glide. The second vowel is the off glide. So the articulators begin when the position of saying the first vowel, and then they switch midstream into the articulation of the second vowel. So in the end, when you combine two vowels together, you shorten each one slightly and you blend them. So these are the symbols. These are the diphthongs. I, as in my. So to transcribe this, the word my, you put and then you put this symbol here. It will be my. And then oi, as in toy. T, and then this diphthong, toy. And then ow, as in cow. K, and then this diphthong, cow, or now. And then a, this one is as a diphthong when you have words like one syllable words, like make, may, hey, play. So that is the diphthong, A. And then O as rose or toes. So that is the emphasized O. So how many diphthongs do we have in English? 5. Know them one by one, and know what is an on glide is, what an off glide is. How many off glides are there when you look at these 5 diphthongs? How many in English do we have? Off glides, the sound at the end. So let's see. We have I, and we have I, and then we have O, O, and then we have them repeated here. So only have the I and the O, 2 off glides in English. I and O. How many on glides do we have? Let's see. The A, and then O, and then A, and then O. So 1, 2, 3, and 4. So these 4 sounds that we have as on glides, but we only have 2 off glides in English, and both of them are high. For example, here when you say, you want to say I, say ah, e, but you blend them and you produce this sound combined with this sound. So it will be I. So you go from low, the tongue rises to high, front. And then you want to say, for example, ow, you get this and then oo, blend them, and the result is you get this sound, and you get the shorter form, so they are blended together to make ow, ow. So in both cases, for the off glides, you rise. So these are the only off glides in English, and one you rise forward, and for others you rise back. And this spectrogram shows you the transition from the on glide to the off glide, and you could see it on display here. When you say that the vocal, the F1 is about 900, and then as you switch into E, you notice that it makes it lower here. But then for the second formant, then you could see that for E, it rises quickly to above 3,000, to 2030 or so. For the ow, so F1 is high, oo, F1 is lower. So quickly you go from this area and you switch transition to the oo. But in the end here, when you look at F2, it is going to show for about here, and then for oo, it is going to show much lower for oo. This may be a good time to take a break and then come back and look at the consonants. So consonants are divided grouped into two groups. One is called resonants or sonorants. Both of them kind of are two names for the same thing. And one group is called non-resonant sounds. We are speaking again only about consonants. And in order to describe a consonant, we use three characteristics that we'll speak about later. But generally, what is the difference between sonorant sounds and non-sonorant sounds, or resonant sounds and non-resonant sounds? Resonant sounds are produced by or with a minimal constriction along the vocal tract. So they resonate through the entire vocal tract, oral cavity, nasal cavity. They resonate through the entire vocal tract. They have one periodic source, which is vocal fold vibration. They do not have noises, for example, or particular tones coming from the oral cavity or nasal cavity because of constriction. So they are characterized, they have formant values quite similar to vowels. So all of them are voiced sounds. There is no noise, but particularly no constrictions causing noises in the vocal tract with a nasal cavity or oral cavity. They are all pure tones. Now for the resonant sounds, there are three categories, and these three categories together include 7 sounds that I'll discuss. Now let's look at the non-resonant sounds. For the non-resonant sounds, you have a constriction, significant constriction in the vocal tract. That constriction could be small or could be complete. And the resonance occurs in front of the constriction. So between the constriction and the lips. So for example, you say k, 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 between the area where the tongue is closing against the velum, the tongue is closing the the oral cavity here, and the lips. All that room is a place that has resonance. But behind the constriction, there is no resonance. So again, non-resonance only resonate in the area between the constriction and the lips, while resonant sounds resonate throughout the vocal tract. So when you think about the constriction, know where the constriction is, look at the space and see if the space is larger, how does that affect frequency? If the space is smaller, how does it affect frequency? Non-resonant sounds are, again, have an aperiodic source, which is noise produced in the oral cavity, or between the vocal folds. And also, some of them are going to have periodic tones as well. So there are two groups of non-resonant sounds. One group we know as voiced, and one group we know as voiceless. So the voiceless group of non-resonant sounds is basically made by noises, by aperiodic tones in the oral cavity and between the vocal folds in the glottis. There is no vibration. There is no pure tone in voiceless sounds. How about voiced non-resonant sounds? Voiced, they have two sources for the tone. They have a pure tone from the vocal folds. They vibrate. This is why we call these sounds voiced. And they also have noise created in the oral cavity or between the vocal folds. So as a result, I'm sorry, not between the vocal folds. They have the vocal fold tone in addition to oral constrictions causing noises in the oral cavity, and that gives them the two sources for the tone. So noise mixed with pure tone creates voiced sounds. We only describe consonants saying they are voiced or voiceless. Vowels are all 100% voiced. So there's no reason you never describe a vowel as voiced or voiceless. Do not make this mistake. So let's look at the different consonant sounds. We first take the sonorant consonants, and these include three groups. All of the sounds in these three groups are voiced. All of them are made by pure tones from the vocal folds. They have no constriction, no noises created by constriction here. So first, nasal sounds. As in Mike, as in night, and then as in king. And so these sounds, when you take the for example, it is a voiced, nasal, voiced, nasal, and then the place, we know, bilabial. So we call it a bilabial, voiced, nasal sound. You could add sonorant, that's fine, or consonant. The is a voiced alveolar, and then so voiced alveolar nasal, and then the is a voiced velar, because the velum, the back of the tongue comes in contact with the velum, voiced velar nasal. And then we have the next category, liquids. Conveniently, the word liquid begins with an L. So L and these are the liquid sounds. So when you describe the L, look at first voiced or voiceless. So L is voiced, and then where is it produced? Alveolar ridge. So it's a voiced alveolar. And then what is the category? Voiced alveolar liquid. Voiced alveolar liquid. And then the is going to be a voiced palatal liquid. And then the glides are two, which is the w and the ya. So w is a voiced bilabial, u, w, and it is the single sound that has two placements in English. U, bilabial, and velar. So voiced bilabial, velar, consonant, glide, glide. And then the ya, as in yes, it is a voiced, e, palatal, e, and then, e, voiced, palatal, glide. So again, these are all voiced sounds, and you need to know the categories, these three categories, the nasals, liquids, glides, and be able to give an example for each one. The non-resonant sounds include two major categories and one small category that is a combination of both. So let's here, I described all of these basically, but these here, but let's do the description of the other ones here. You can use this chart, or you can use this one, whatever it is that you prefer. So when we look here at the sonorant sounds on the lower part, you have liquids, and for example, including the u and Don't worry about the rhotic and the lateral stuff. Don't worry about these subcategories. Nasals are here, and so that tells you the manner. What kind of sound do you have? Nasal sound, a sound that causes friction, and so on. Or in addition to the place, where is the sound produced? For example, this is is a nasal. Voiced here, voiced, nasal, and then alveolar. How about the u? So u is a voiced, and then in the place is alveolar, and then liquid. The w, as I explained, has two positions, two placements. It has the bilabial positioning, and it has the velar. So it is a voiced, bilabial, velar, and then glide. So let's look now at the two major categories of sonorants, non-sonorants or non-resonant sounds. They're also called obstruents. So because the thing is, phoneticians use, certain names. Linguists use certain names. Speech and hearing scientists use different names. But they are the same things. So the first category is the stops. The second category is the fricatives. And the stops, because they have pairs. Each pair is a voiceless sound and a voiced sound. Each pair. So each pair now is called a cognate pair. So let's demonstrate. Let's look at so these are the three characteristics that we use to describe any consonant at all. You first say, is it voiced or voiceless? Where is it produced? And the manner. And again, you just give it in the way that I'm describing here. Let's look at the p. The p first. Is it voiced or voiceless? You start here. It's a voiceless, and now placement. Bilabial. Voiceless, bilabial. And then what does it sound like? It's a stop, because it makes you completely stop. So voiceless, bilabial, stop. Only 3 words. You should not be giving descriptions and, this sound or tell me how, just give exact 3-word descriptions. And start with voicing first, and then move to placement and move to manner. Now, let's describe the B. The B, it is a voiced bilabial stop. What is the difference now between the P and B in describing them? You are right. The B is voiced, the P is voiceless. So when you have two consonants that are similar in everything except for voicing, then these become cognates. If they're different anything else, it doesn't matter. You don't call them cognates. You only call them cognates if they are different only in voicing. So this is the first pair. Stops. And then the T and D. So try these sounds so you can feel where you make them. T is a voiceless alveolar stop. How about the D? Voiced alveolar stop. And then you go forward, back to say the K, voiceless, and then velar, because the velum contacts the back of the tongue, and it's a stop. And the G is a voiced velar stop. And then, so 3 pairs, 1, 2, 3, and the single sound make the stops. The single sound, that symbol here that you have is the that is as in when you say the word ba'en or ka'en. So that is the glottal stop. Basically the vocal folds come together, shut, and then go. They do not vibrate. They do not vibrate. They just hit and go. So these are the stop sounds. How many of them are voiceless? The top ones. How many are voiced? 1, 2, 3. The fricative sounds is the biggest category. Basically 1 pair, 2 pairs, 3 pairs, 4 pairs, and a single. So each of the 4 pairs, has a voiceless and a voiced. So is a voiceless, labiodental, fricative. The V is exactly the same, except that the V is voiced. This symbol, tha, the theta, tha, it is as in bath or math. So it is voiceless, and then interdental. That means the tongue is between the upper and lower teeth, tha. And it also has another name. Tha is also called lingua dental. Whatever descriptor you use, that is fine for me, as long as it is found somewhere in one of the textbooks or studies that we use. So it's lingua dental or interdental. And fricative. So it's voiceless, interdental or lingua dental, fricative. The is exactly the same as in father or them, except that it is a voiced interdental fricative. S is a voiceless alveolar fricative. Z is the same, except for the Z is voiced. Sh, that is as in, typically we say the SH makes it, as in cash, mash, and it is a voiceless palatal fricative. This sound sometimes is referred to as alveopalatal. Again, because it's very close between the alveolar ridge and the palate, it doesn't matter to us. You can use palatal or alveopalatal. Frankly, will make it easier on yourself if you say palatal. J is the same, except for the J is voiced and the other one is not. H is the single sound, and it is produced in the glottis, and it is voiceless. So it's a voiceless, glottal, fricative. And then you take simply, you create 2 sounds with to make them affricates. make sure your spelling is correct here. If you make it any different than this, it's gonna create a whole different word. If you create a different name here by a spelling error, that is going to make a whole different category that will not be recognizable when you say, name it any other than fricatives or affricates. So anyways, the affricate category has two sounds, two consonants. One is voiced, one is voiceless. And each sound is a combination of one stop and one fricative sound. So the t is a voiceless sound. It combines with a voiceless sound. So an alveolar sound, an alveolar stop, is combined with a palatal palatal fricative to make ch, as in cat, ch, match. So that becomes an affricate consonant. And then the voiced form of that is the d, combined with the j. It becomes j, as in judge, fridge, cage. So now we have a voiced, palatal, affricate. So these are the affricates. So we have covered all these consonants and all the vowels now, and you should be able to describe each one of them. And again, this is a crash course in phonetics, so we didn't go deeply in terms of the phonetics. This table shows the sounds in a different way, but that's exactly the same description. Whatever you use is fine. Just in case you wonder why, this upside down, well, it is used for, like Southern American, when they, instead of saying white, they tend to say white. So it becomes, different than the wa that most people use. Okay. Now we look at the nasal sounds and the other consonants in terms of resonant frequency, what happens in the nasal tract and the vocal tract. For the nasal sounds, you basically want the velum to be down so that the air goes through the nasal cavity. And so it requires an open velopharyngeal port, and the airstream is obstructed somewhere in the oral cavity. OC means oral cavity. And the sound exits through the nasal passages, is through the nostrils. That makes the three nasal sounds. So the sound that exits the nasal passages is called a nasal sound, or simply a nasal murmur. So the nasal murmur is a combination of nasal formants and antiformants. So what are the antiformants? Antiformants are bands of energy that actually oppose the formants. They resist the formants. That, in other words, they are factors that decrease the energy in the sound wave. Oh, and that characterizes the nasal sounds and characterizes the liquids, O and So let's take an example. You want to say you close your lips, the air hits here, and then some air goes up to the nasal cavity, but the air that is here is going to bounce back and also go through the nasal cavity. So the obstruction of the air by the lips is going to reroute the air, and that's going to make it take a longer journey to exit through the nasal cavity. And a lot of stuff is going to happen that make that nasal tone now decreased and in energy, and that is because of the anti-resonances. So the anti-resonances act as a band stop filter. They work to try to delete the sounds inside of the bandwidth of these sounds. And the other natural way that you make any sound, the vocal tract itself acts as a band pass, a pass band filter that is, you kind of enhance and amplify the sounds within that range, within that bandwidth. But the anti-resonance work against that, completely the opposite. So, why do the nasal antiformants occur? Number one, the sound, the obstruction along the oral cavity makes the air reroute. It makes the air rerouted to through the nasal cavity, and that creates, it makes the journey longer. Number one, and that makes the energy decrease. The nasal cavity, the structure itself, is conducive to dampening the sound. There's a lot of mucus, the nasal bones, and these convolutions where the sound just goes along the nasal concha, up and, down, and it is going, these obstructions are going to dampen, to decrease the sound energy, and thus, because, that is gonna produce antiformants. And also, with the nasal cavity itself acting as a stop band filter, weakening the signal. Again, because of the structure, because of the nasal concha, and because of the mucus and all of this. And then, lastly, because the sound of the air exits through two narrow passages, which are the nares, that is gonna weaken the energy further, as opposed to the mouth. The mouth is bigger. So these are three reasons why nasal antiformants occur. When you look at the nasal murmur, you can see these vertical bars here. They show the weakened energy of the sound wave. The darker ones that you could see here underneath, they are the actual formants. So, but see these vertical bars, that are wide, it means that the compressions aren't occurring as closely together. That means energy is dissipating, is weakening. And here you can see more, as I say, ma or ma here. So nasal, the antiformants start to emerge for the at 1000 hertz, for the at 2000 hertz, for the at 3000 hertz. Why is that? Why are the antiformants for lower than those for Why are the antiformants for lower than those for Can you think of it? So it all has to do with space. Let's say Now we have the whole volume now, the entire vocal tract, from the vocal folds to the oral cavity to the nasal cavity, the entire thing is now resonating. So that basically, the greater the volume is, the lower the pitch, the lower the resonant frequency. Now let's go to the Where is the obstruction for the Now, when you put your tongue next to the alveolar ridge, you eliminate the distance between the alveolar ridge and the lips. You make the vocal tract shorter now. And that means a smaller volume, and that means a higher resonant frequency. And now you go and say, So here you have a constriction that is leaving out a big part, basically the whole vocal, oral cavity mostly. And then now you are coupling the pharynx with the nasal cavities, and that means the space is smaller, and that means the frequency is higher. So know how to explain this with reference to the volume. Nasal formant values. Formant values now for the nasals, because we said nasals have both antiformants and formants. Formant values for nasal generally go from 250 to 300 hertz. And again, because the cavity is huge, that is, this is a much larger cavity to produce these sounds. And you couple the nasal cavity with the vocal tract. How do the liquids and glides, how are they characterized in terms of resonant frequency? First, both of them have limited constriction, limited articulated constriction. When we say, oh, the air is going from both sides, going out from both sides, oh, and then from both sides as well, oh, and the top of the tongue. So the airflow is neither completely laminar nor completely turbulent. Oh, but you can continue each one. Oh, you can't continue a sound like p and b, for example. So the tongue position, standing up and obstructing the air, making it rerouted, that weakens the energy and that creates antiformants, just like the nasal sounds. The two sounds are shorter in duration, and the formant transitions are faster than for diphthongs. For example, if you have a sound coming next to another sound, and you transition, say light, or ring, the transition is faster than for diphthongs. For yah and w, the glides, yah, if you break it down, it actually is two sounds, but they become shorter as you blend them. So e and then a, e shwa, e a, yeah. You start again with the characteristics of the e, that is low F1 and high F2 at the beginning, and then e a, and then you transition to the next sound, which is the and that is going to change the frequency, because it's again a blend of two sounds. Ooh, I'm sorry, wa is also a blend of two sounds. Wa, woo. So you have ooh, you begin with the same characteristics as the oo, with high back tongue position, lip rounding, and the formant value is very similar to oo at the beginning, low F1 and relatively low F2. And then the transition to the next part of the sound, oo, is going to depend on what sound is coming after this. Like when you say when is different than what, or different than why. So here, you can look at the environment, at the phonetic context. You have yeah, and it is preceded by ah and followed by ah. You'll see the difference. So say you start here with ah at 900 hertz. Ah, yeah, ah, yeah. As you go closer, you are going to make a transition down because E is lower, F1 is lower, and ah, yeah. So you could see how, as you go away, close and away from the ya, then the frequency is going to change. And then you go up, you can see the characteristics of the E here. Now let's say E-yay, E-yay, E-yay. There's hardly a distinction, but there's like some kind of a transition here that weakens the energy a bit, but it's almost the same as the E. Now awa, awa, awa. So is higher F1, and as you go down in anticipation, you make it lower because wa is low, and then you rise again as the you say the on the other side. This one is E, we. You have F1 basically the same, no change, because both of them, U, E, are similar. But they get distinguished when you move to back to the E with the tongue high, and F2 is high. In terms of formant values, the U and are similar in values. The tongue tip again rises and toward the alveolar ridge for the U, and it rises to the palate for the and so now F1, for example, is 350, F2 is 1300, F3 is 2700 for the O. Now, depending on the phonetic context, what comes before the what comes after is going to modify the pitch. For the it's very similar, F1, F2, but the F3, it comes faster, much faster, at 1600 hertz for the So again, the is very influenced by what comes before, what comes after, and in many, many cases, of course, the is not even a consonant at all. It becomes simply a rounded vowel, as I described in the central, mid-central vowels, and But this describes as a consonant, as when you say ring as a consonant. So here you could see visual description of the transition, formant transition says ra, ra. And looking at the characteristics that we've just discussed, you can see them displayed now as you transition. Now, re, you could see again the transition, and then Allah, and then Eli. So this will end here, and then the next section is going to we are going to cover the rest of the consonant sounds and kind of wrap up the section and the unit, and then we'll be ready to move to the auditory system afterwards. So thank you. Now, before we end, I'm gonna ask you some questions, and if you can't answer any of these questions now after listening and viewing this lecture, then you need to go back and do some more reading and go back to the lecture. So here are the questions that I want you to know from this presentation, from this lecture. Number 1. What are the major characteristics of the vocal tract as a resonator? Why is it so special? What makes it so special in terms of resonance? What is the average length of the vocal tract for the adult male, for the adult female, and for the young child? How does the vocal tract length influence its resonant frequency? What phoneme is used as the basis for calculating vocal tract frequencies? What is the sound filter theory? What is the source? What is the filter? How do you prove that the filter is independent from the source? And how do you prove that the source is independent from the filter? What 3 basic factors determine vocal tract resonant frequency? Give me examples. Under what conditions do F1 and F2 change? How is the tongue position related to F1? How is oral cavity length related to F2? Give examples of sounds. What is a spectrogram? What is spectrography? What type of information does a spectrogram show or display? What are the 3 differences between narrowband spectrograms and broad and wideband spectrograms? What are the 4 criteria that we use to describe a vowel? List the 10th vowels, 7 tense vowels, and provide 1 word for each vowel. For example, 1 tense vowel is oo. A word in which oo comes is pool. Another example, 1/10 vowel is ah. An example word in which the sound occurs is car. List the list the lax vowels and provide a word, example word for each one. List the diphthongs and provide an example word for each diphthong. What is a diphthong? What is an on glide? What is an off glide? What are the two sounds that make off glides in English? What are the four sounds that make the on glides? What are the difference between resonant or sonorant sounds and non-resonant or obstruent sounds? List the three categories of sonorant sounds. Which sonorant sounds are voiced? List all sounds and give a word for each. List all the stops. Which ones are voiced? Which ones are voiceless? Do the same for fricatives and do the same for affricates. Make sure to be able to provide an example word in which the sound occurs. What are the antiformants? Why do they occur? Do they only characterize nasal sounds? When do the first antiformants occur for How do you explain the difference between the antiformants for and Why is the first antiformant for lower than Why is the antiformant for lower than What are the formant values for nasal sounds? And lastly, I need you to know the acoustic characteristics of liquids, glides, and the resonant values, generally, the resonant values that they have. So if you do not know any of the questions that I've asked here that relate to this lecture, then you need to go back to the lecture, you need to go back to your book and the slides, and you'll find the answer there. Thank you.